Betty and Jonathan were the kind of couple that made older women turn and sigh with affection at the supermarket. 2 years of marriage flew by in a flash. She was a cozy blonde with eyes the color of a summer sky, working as a freelance interior designer. He was a tall, handsome man with a dark complexion, a light beard, and a charming smile. Working in sales for a large international company. At least, that's what it said on his business cards and in her heart. Their life flowed smoothly. Yoga on Saturdays, movie nights on Wednesdays. Joint plans to buy a house in the countryside, and the obligatory, "good night, darling," text message if Jonathan was late for a client meeting. That evening was an ordinary Tuesday. Jonathan left in the morning, kissed her goodbye, and promised to be back by 7 to catch the premiere of his new film. Betty made lasagna according to his favorite recipe, set the table, and lit the candles. 7 o'clock. 7:30. 8. She dialed his number. It was off. Subscriber temporarily unavailable. Betty sent a message. "Honey, where are you? I'm worried." It went unread. At 9, she called his best friend, Mark. Mark was surprised. They hadn't seen each other since last week. At 10, she called the hospitals. Information nervously replied that there were no admissions with his information. At 1 in the morning, Betty sat in the kitchen with a cold lasagna and a cup of iced tea, convincing herself that his phone had simply died and was stuck in traffic. Morning brought no relief. Jonathan's phone was still silent. She called him at work. The nice secretary was surprised. "Jonathan, we don't have anyone like that. You must have the wrong department." Betty hung up and, for the first time, felt the ground shift beneath her. The next 3 days were hell. She called every morgue in the city, from the closest ones to those in the suburbs. Her hands shook and her voice broke during each conversation. No. There were no signs of a woman like that. No one had seen Jonathan. No one knew Jonathan. The police opened a missing persons case. But they looked at her with sympathy bordering on professional skepticism. Stay home, maybe she'll show up. Men often leave. Betty couldn't sleep. She lay on their huge bed, inhaling the scent of his pillow and trying to figure out where she'd gone wrong. Maybe he'd fallen out of love. Maybe he was having a midlife crisis and just ran away. But then why didn't he take his things? His passport was left in the nightstand. His favorite watch lay on the dresser. He'd left wearing what he was wearing and vanished. On the 4th day, she found a strange phone bill in his desk. The number wasn't hers, his mother's, or Mark's. She called it. A long ring, then a mechanical voice. "Subscriber temporarily unavailable." The feeling of anxiety gave way to a clammy dread. Who was he really? A week after his disappearance, at 10:30 in the evening, the doorbell rang. Not briefly and politely, but long and brazenly, with an unpleasant rattling sound. Betty approached the door and peered through the peephole. 3 people were standing in the stairwell. 2 athletic guys with short hair and a third, older, with cold eyes and a scar above his eyebrow. "Open up, we need to talk," the one with the scar said loudly. Her heart sank. She opened the door. She had no weapon, no defense, only hope that it was a mistake. "Who are you?" she asked, leaving the chain on the door. "We're from the people your Jonathan owes money to. We came to talk." The guy with the scar grinned. "What debt?" "You're mistaken." "Wrong." He laughed, and his laugh was unpleasant, croaking. "Jonathan Myers lives here, married to Betty Myers. He borrowed from us to develop his business. 300 grand. The collateral is the apartment." "Your apartment, baby?" Betty's legs buckled. She leaned against the cold wall. "There's some kind of mistake. He doesn't have a business. He works in nowhere," the second guy interrupted, the younger one, with insolent eyes and a tattoo on his neck. "Jonathan Myers is a con man. He has several debts around town." "You must be a cover." "I don't know anything," Betty whispered. "You know one thing," the older man said, bringing his face close to the doorway. "The interest rate will go up in a month. And in 2, we'll come and buy the apartment. If you find a man, tell him we're looking." And not very kindly. They left as suddenly as they had appeared. Betty closed the door, slid down to the floor, and burst into tears. For the first time that week, she cried not out of fear for her husband, but out of fear for herself. In the morning, she began digging. And what she uncovered was more terrifying than a visit from the debt collectors. First, she called his mother, Eleanor. She lived in another city and always seemed a bit cold but polite to Betty. Eleanor listened to her daughter-in-law's rambling story, sighed heavily, and blurted out, "Betty, my dear, I didn't know he'd married again. But you must forgive me. It's his vicious cycle. First Peyton, now you." "Which Peyton?" Betty's voice went cold. "His wife. Legally. They never divorced. Peyton's a good girl, from a wealthy family. He's been with her for about 5 years, probably. Only Peyton kicked him out a year ago for debts and partying. Jonathan, he's so flighty. I thought he'd settled down with you." Betty felt like the walls of the room were closing in, trying to crush her. She thanked her mother-in-law, hung up, and typed, "Peyton," into social media. She found it quickly. A beautiful brunette with sad eyes worked as an architect downtown. Betty texted her, "I'm Jonathan's wife. We need to talk." An hour later, they were sitting in a coffee shop on the waterfront. Peyton turned out to be a lively, nervous woman with an expensive bag and a dull look in her eyes. "Did you get caught too?" she asked by way of greeting. "I didn't know about you," Betty said quietly. "I didn't know about you, although I had already guessed." Peyton sipped her coffee. "We've been married for 5 years. The last 2, he's been living his own life. He had affairs, debts, scams. He took out loans in my name, took out payday loans in my name. I barely fought off the lawsuits. Now we're officially in the process of divorce, but the paperwork isn't ready yet. So technically, he's still my husband." "How did you live with him?" Betty sighed. "I loved him." Peyton shrugged. "Stupid, huh? He knew how to love. In his own way. And then it turned out all he knew was lying. He has a gambling problem. Betty. He lost everything, my savings. Mom's dacha, your apartment, probably, and now he's on the run. Because he owes more than just those thugs who came to you. There are people more serious than that. But he'll come back?" Betty asked desperately. "Are you still hoping?" Peyton smiled bitterly. "Darling, you need to save yourself. Get all the injuries documented, and if anything happens, go to a lawyer. Prove you didn't take out those debts. Because tomorrow they could come back. And not just them." They talked until evening. Peyton told Betty things about Jonathan she couldn't even imagine. His habit of disappearing for weeks at a time, his lies about business trips, the fake friends he brought home. It turned out that Mark, Betty's best friend of 2 years, was simply an accomplice, covering Jonathan's alibi. Betty returned home late. The apartment was dark and empty. She went into the bedroom, opened the closet, and stared for a long time at his shirts, neatly hung shoulder to shoulder. Then she took out his suitcase and began packing his things into garbage bags. She didn't know if he was alive. She didn't know if she'd come back. But she knew for sure that the man she'd married had never existed. There was a talented actor, gambler, and con man named Jonathan, who'd simply changed the scenery and found a new audience in her. A month later, she filed for divorce. 2 months later, she won the case, proving she had nothing to do with her husband's debts, as they had been taken out without her knowledge and using forged documents. Miraculously, thanks to her father's old connections, she managed to keep the apartment. The police found Jonathan 6 months later in a neighboring region. He was living with a new woman, posing as a travel agency manager, and racking up more debts. He was arrested for large-scale fraud. Betty didn't go to court. Peyton did. Then she called Betty and said briefly, they gave him 5 years. He said he loved us both. Betty hung up, went to the window, and looked at the sunset. Somewhere beyond the horizon, her perfect family crumbled to dust. But strangely enough, her heart felt light. Because the truth, no matter how bitter, was better than a sweet lie. She threw away his phone number, deleted all the photos, and installed a new door with a good lock. Life went on. Without Jonathan. But with a clean slate, on which she would now write only her own story.